Hi readers! Today we kick off our poetry unit, and our learning target is that you'll be able to learn some basic elements of this genre of poetry. You're going to need your reader's notebook, and you're going to need a pencil to maybe jot some notes and some thinking. So before we begin truly getting into this, I want to let you know that writers of poetry, poets, often play by different rules than other writers. And here's what I mean by that. Sometimes poets make up words. Sometimes they don't use punctuation. Sometimes they don't even capitalize the beginning letters of each line. And that's what I mean by they kind of play by different rules. So if writers of poetry play by different rules, sometimes the readers of poetry have to get into a different mindset when we read poetry, because we got to really figure out what is it this writer wants to communicate. So what is poetry? Here are some basic elements of poetry. You will be seeing and hearing these words as we go through our unit. Lines, stanzas, rhythm, rhyme, repetition, which means repeating, imagery, that's that movie in our mind, and then of course figurative language. We'll get into that as well. So let's take a look as an introduction a video from BrainPop that tells us again some basics about poetry. Here we go.
I saw the robots of my generation destroyed by bad programming, beeping hysterical, wiring themselves in the garage at dawn, looking for an AC adapter, the absolute heart of the lithium-ion battery, guaranteed to run for 1,000 years. Dig it, brothers and sisters. Dear Tim and Moby, what can you tell me about poetry? From Gabriella. Chances are you're already pretty familiar with some forms of poetry. From the nursery rhymes you learned as a kid to the song lyrics you listen to now, your head is probably filled with poetry. Poetry is any writing that uses words for their sound and rhythm as well as their meaning. Ordinary writing, like you'd find in a textbook, newspaper article, or novel, is called prose. It expresses ideas in simple, direct language. Poetry, on the other hand, usually emphasizes artistic elements like rhythm, rhyme, and repetition. You can measure a poem's rhythm with something called meter. Meter takes into account how many syllables are in each line, what the pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables is, stuff like that. For example, the English poet Alexander Pope wrote in iambic pentameter. That's a popular type of meter with 10 syllables per line, and with every unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. The rhythm of a poem in iambic pentameter goes ba-bump, 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 ba-bump. Relentless walls whose darksome round contains repentant sighs and voluntary pains, ye rugged rocks which holy knees have worn, ye grots and caverns shagged with horrid thorn. That's Alexander Pope. You'll notice that repetition comes into play here. You can see the first two lines start with a 3-syllable word beginning with the letter R, and the use of ye repeats at the start of the second two lines. Right, I was just getting to rhyme. Rhyme is the repetition of similar sounds, usually at the end of lines of poetry. Far and few are the lands where the Jumblies live. Their heads are green, their hands are blue, and they went to sea in a sieve. Not all poems rhyme, but ones that do usually have what's called a rhyme scheme or pattern. Let's take a look at that Pope poem again. Relentless walls whose darksome round contains repentant sighs and voluntary pains, ye rugged rocks which holy knees have worn, ye grots and caverns shagged with horrid thorn. You can see the pattern. It's divided up into pairs of rhyming lines or couplets. Mark each different rhyme with a letter, and you have the rhyme scheme. Not all poems have rhyme or meter, though. A lot of modern poets write in free verse, which has no set meter or rhyme scheme. The lines are simply broken up the way the poet sees fit. You are humped higher and higher, black as stone. You sit with your head like a carving in space, and the little green cat is a bug in the grass? That's a good question. People write poetry because it can express certain feelings and ideas better than prose. Poets often used their craft to make you think about an experience in a new and interesting way. It's sort of like painting a picture with language. Check out this piece by Emily Dickinson. It sifts from leaden sieves, it powders all the wood, it fills with alabaster wool the wrinkles of the road. Can you tell what she's talking about here? Right, snow. To make us see and feel the snowfall, Dickinson uses the poetic tool of metaphor. That's when you compare one thing to something else. In this poem, snow's not just frozen water, it's alabaster wool that sifts from leaden sieves. Sorta does make you shiver reading this. Poems can often seem difficult to understand when you first look at them. Often it's because poets like toying with the different meanings of words and phrases. So when you read a poem, make sure you read it thoroughly and carefully. And if possible, you should read it aloud to get a better feel for the sound and rhythm of the words. By paying close attention, you'll have a better chance of understanding what the poet is trying to say. You've got a poem? I think you misspelled thermonuclear here.
So from our Brain Pop video, fourth graders, I think that I touched on some things, or the big idea from that is when authors and poets write, they do look at that artistic element of writing, and they try to look at something or think about something in a different way, and then they communicate that through their poem. So we'll keep that in mind as we try to decipher and really think artistically about some of the poetry that we will be reading. Our target today was, of course, learning some elements of poetry. You can see that there are lots of things that we will be discussing and learning about during our poetry unit. So this is going to become a really great resource for us as we continue through our unit. Let's take a look at our first poem. A well-known author, well-known poet, Langston Hughes, wrote a poem titled Mother to Son. So as we listen to this, because we're going to hear the audio and see some visuals, titled Mother to Son, I want you to think about the rhythm that this reader is presenting it, any figurative language, any imagery that is created for you or that movie in your mind, and we will come back to it. So here it is, Mother to Son by Langston Hughes.
Well, son, I'll tell you. Life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it, and splinters, and boards torn up, and places with no carpet on the floor. Bare. But all the time I's been a-climbing on, and reaching landings, and turning corners, and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So boy, don't you turn back. Don't you sit down on the steps 'cause you find it's kinda hard. Don't you fall now. For I's is still going, honey. I's is still climbing. And life for me ain't been no crystal stair.
readers, you can tell by the way that the reader presented mother to son, the rhythm in which the reader spoke, right? Real slow, purposeful, with that tone of like somberness or a little bit of sadness. And then towards the end of the poem, where the mother is speaking to her son, she gets pretty powerful, like keep on, right? Keep on keeping on. Life is hard. And then kind of encourages him, like, hey, for me, it hasn't been no crystal stair either. You can do this. And then we were presented with some figurative language as well. Some of like the crystal stair and the bare floor and the tacks and the splinters weren't necessarily literal tacks or literal splinters, but just like difficulties and hardships. So that's how our poets unfold and write to us. Then, of course, throughout that, hopefully an image or those images were coming to you and you were getting a powerful picture in your mind from mother to son. So let's take a look at a different poem. This poem is titled, What is One? And it's written by Judith Nichols. Follow along as I read this out loud. What is one? One is the sun, a rhino's horn, a drop of dew, a lizard's tongue. One is the world, a lonely whale, an elephant's trunk, a monkey's tail. One is an acorn, one is the moon, one is a forest, felled too soon. So I'm letting that one sink in. I'm letting that one be like, yeah, a lot of these things that this author was writing about are unique or special. And I kind of get this idea that, not knowing the author, but I think that this author thinks nature is pretty amazing. Then I noticed that something changes just towards the end here. I was expecting it to kind of be like noticing these special things. And then towards the end of the poem, the last couple of lines here, one is a forest. Oh, go away. One is a forest, felled too soon. That makes me, there it is. One is a forest, felled too soon. Think about what that might mean. All right, let's continue. What is one? Here is the poem repeated on this page so that you can view it and you can see it. But in your Google Classroom today, you have an assignment. It's on a Jamboard. So what you're going to find is this poem by Judith Nichols. And you're going to be able, we're going to kind of start to break down our poetry. Break it down means like really dig into the elements that our poets are using, our authors are using. So here's what we're going to want to do when we get to that Jamboard, and I will show you as well. First thing that we're going to do is cloud or bubble the title. We're going to count how many lines are in the poem and determine how many. And then we're going to box the stanzas and count them and how many will there be. So I'm going to help you with that. I'm going to exit our slideshow and I'm going to get to the Jamboard that you will see. It looks like this, fourth graders, and it also has the directions there on the left side. If you haven't used a Jamboard before, I'm going to quickly teach you that there are some tools over to the left. There are different pens that you can use, a pen, a marker, a highlighter, and even a paintbrush, and you can change the colors. That's not our focus today, but there's the capabilities of that. There's an eraser, there's a pointer or a select if you kind of just want to reset. We even have the capabilities of a sticky note if you needed to write something. We'll get to that. Some shapes and a text box. Well, for today, I'm just doing a few things with my poem, What is One? So I'm going to grab my pen, and I'm going to grab my marker, just because I think that's a little bit thicker to work with. I'm going to keep my ink at black. Again, this isn't the most important thing that you're doing. It is the following of these directions. We're going to bubble the title. And here's what I mean by bubble the title. We're going to just really highlight, or we're really going to pay attention to that title. We're going to cloud it. We're going to bubble it. The title is What is One? We do that because it is important to pay attention to the title that the author and the poet have selected for their poem. Okay, so I've done that. Okay, count the number of lines. Okay, so I could, and again, this will be tricky for you, but I'm going to go ahead and count. Then I'm going to put a little dot next to it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oops. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, I'm going to double check. I noticed that my pen wasn't working on each, so I'm going to make a little mark here. 1, and 2, and 3, and 4. You guys could be writing numbers if you wanted. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I got 12 2 times. I'm confident that this poem has 12 lines. 12, and I'm going to label that just like I do in math. Please don't judge my writing because I'm not using a mouse. Yikes. 12 lines in our poem. Makes me appreciate what you guys have to do on your Jamboards too. All right, we've counted the number of lines and we've got 12, right? And now we're going to box the stanzas. And it asks how many stanzas. Well, here's an element of poetry that we're learning about. A stanza is like a paragraph, but in a poem. So we're used to finding little breaks or indentations in our regular books. Those are paragraphs. We've written paragraphs. Well, we call it a stanza in poetry. So if we're going to box our stanzas, I'm going to make this a little bit different here. I'm going to stick with I use a highlighter this time. My first stanza, I see a clear break here. I can see that these 4 lines are in one stanza. Okay. I see another break. Here is my second stanza. Okay. And then I follow my work down here, my third stanza. Okay. What do my directions say? Box the stanzas. Okay, I've done that. How many stanzas? All right. Well, we've got 1, we've got 2, we've got 3 stanzas in this poem. So I'm going to go over here and write 3. Okay. And like I did before, I probably should label. Highlighter seems to be a little bit easier for me. Not awesome. Some of you might be giggling. Like, oh, Mrs. Wendorf, we feel your pain because we're trying to write with our fingers too. Okay. 3 stanzas. Okay. And then we have done our work here as well. We've clouded our title or bubbled our title. We've counted the number of lines. We have 12 lines in this poem and we've boxed our stanzas. This is your Jamboard to go and manipulate, go work with, follow those directions. And you're going to want to make sure that that gets submitted or turned in to your teacher. Okay. And then we end, 4th graders, we end with going back to our learning target, that you will know or learn some basic elements of poetry. We got to hear a brain pop that talked about like all the different things that a poet uses. We got to hear a poem titled Mother to Son, and we got to actually read and manipulate some things in a poem. So I think we've got a basic understanding of some elements of poetry. So off to independent reading you go. My suggestion would be if we're in our poetry unit, you're going to want to find some poetry. Go to your Epic accounts and find some great poetry to read. Some of it's humorous, some of it's deep. Just enjoy. Off you go.